if you want to invest in the senior care industry, you probably assume you need like $50 million in capital.
At least. Right.
You think you need this massive commercial real estate license and a plot of land big enough to build some sprawling, I don't know, 100-bed hospital complex.
Exactly. The traditional big box model.
Yeah, because we've all been conditioned to think that caring for the aging population requires massive institutional scale. But what if the most disruptive, high-growth model in elder care right now is actually happening inside a standard 4-bedroom suburban house?
Right at the end of a cul-de-sac.
Exactly. So welcome to today's deep dive. Our mission today is to unpack this exact model. We're looking at Avendelle Assisted Living.
It's a fascinating model.
It really is. We're going to dive into their unit economics, the business model itself, and this operational moat they have built. Because for you listening, whether you're a corporate professional looking to escape the rat race, or maybe an existing multi-unit owner, this aging population boom is massive.
It is fundamentally reshaping the economy.
Right. And we're going to explore why this specific franchise opportunity is appealing to modern families and how that translates into a scalable business. So let's just jump right in.
Let's do it.
So before we look at the financials, we kind of have to understand the consumer psychology here, right? Because the sources outline a model that takes elder care totally out of the commercial zones.
Right, out of the industrial parks.
Yeah, and drops it directly into everyday residential neighborhoods. But, I mean, if you're evaluating business opportunities, buying a single-family home to run a healthcare business sounds incredibly counterintuitive.
It really does sound counterintuitive. I mean,
Sure.
until you examine the psychology of the consumer making the purchasing decision.
Okay, unpack that for me.
Well, Avendelle originated back in 2005 down in North Carolina.
Oh, 2005, okay.
Yeah. And they started placing their care homes in standard middle-class and upper-middle-class neighborhoods. Places like Cary, Raleigh, Apex, Durham.
Just totally normal residential areas.
Exactly. And the architecture is strictly non-institutional. Because think about it. When a family faces that really heart-wrenching decision to move a parent into assisted living, they're universally dreading the facility feel.
Oh, 100%.
They dread the fluorescent lights, the long linoleum hallways, the big commercial dining halls.
Yeah, because they associate that environment with a total loss of independence. It just feels so clinical.
Right. And Avendelle circumvents that initial resistance entirely. A family literally pulls up to a normal driveway.
Wow.
They walk through a normal front door into a living room that looks exactly like the one their mother has lived in for 40 years.
That's a huge emotional shift.
It's massive.
Yeah.
They are providing a literal home-like environment. But, the physical house is only really half of the equation.
Okay, what's the other half?
The operational mechanism driving the demand is actually their care structure.
Right, because I saw in the documentation, it points out they maintain an average resident-to-caregiver ratio of 3-to-1.
Yes, 3-to-1.
And they have this all-inclusive pricing structure. But let me just push back on the business mechanics of that for a second.
Sure, go ahead.
Because if I am an investor, the entire premise of scaling a business is usually finding operational efficiencies.
Right. Economies of scale.
Exactly. In a traditional 100-bed facility, you have one massive commercial kitchen cooking for everyone. You have one centralized maintenance team.
Yeah.
Operating a tiny boutique house with a 3-to-1 staff ratio sounds like, I don't know, running an independent bed and breakfast and trying to outcompete a 500-room Marriott.
That's a great analogy.
Like, where's the efficiency in that?
Well, the efficiency actually lies in the pricing power and the marketing spend. You really have to ask yourself what a family is actually buying when they write that monthly check for assisted living.
Okay, what are they buying?
They are not buying your operational efficiency. They don't
Right.
care about your commercial kitchen. They are buying peace of mind, dignity, and really hypervigilant safety.
I see.
In a massive institution, caregivers are naturally stretched thin across dozens of rooms. There is inherently just a higher margin for error.
Right.
A resident might, not get their medication exactly on time, or maybe a slight shift in their mood or their mobility goes totally unnoticed for a few days.
Because they're just one data point in a very large system.
Exactly. But
Okay.
in an Avendelle home, with that 3-to-1 ratio, the staff knows exactly how the resident takes their coffee.
Wow, yeah.
They notice immediately if someone didn't sleep well or if they're just slightly off balance walking to the kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
That level of intimacy prevents medical issues from just falling through the cracks.
That makes total sense.
And this isn't just theory. Publications like Chapel Hill Magazine and Franchising Magazine USA recently featured Avendelle specifically because this model meets a massive, unfulfilled demand for personalized care.
So the lack of massive scale actually becomes the premium feature. Families are paying for that intimacy.
100%. And because families are so desperately seeking this specific residential setting, the supply and demand curve heavily favors the franchisee.
How so?
Well, you do not need a Marriott-sized marketing budget to fill a massive building. You only need to fill a handful of beds.
Oh, right. It's just a house.
Yeah, because the demand is so concentrated, these boutique homes routinely operate with really high occupancy rates and steady waiting lists.
That's fascinating.
You spend way less on constant lead generation because your product is inherently scarce and highly desirable.
Which significantly changes the occupancy risk for an investor.
Totally.
If you only need to find, 5 or 6 families to reach full capacity, the timeline to profitability shrinks compared to filling a giant complex.
Yeah, exactly.
But that begs a question. If the facility is just a standard residential house, does the initial investment look like buying a piece of residential real estate, or does it look like capitalizing a medical facility?
It falls somewhere in a very strategic middle ground, actually.
Okay, let's talk numbers.
Yeah, let's put the unit economics in perspective.
Sure.
So Avendelle has been franchising since 2015.
Right.
And as of 2024, they operate 23 franchise units across the U.S., alongside 2 company-owned locations.
Got it.
The initial financial blueprint is quite structured. The total investment range to launch an Avendelle location falls between roughly $238,000 on the low end,
Okay.
up to about $538,000.
And that includes the franchise fee, right?
Yes, that includes the initial franchise fee of $45,000. And it's worth noting they do have veteran discounts available.
That's great. And on the back end, looking at the ongoing fees.
It's a 10-year renewable term. You're looking at a 6% royalty fee and a 2% ad royalty fee.
Okay, standard franchise structure there. But, I was reviewing these financial requirements, and something jumped out at me as a massive, almost counterintuitive hurdle.
Really? What stood out?
The liquid capital requirement.
Oh, yeah, yes.
Because you just noted that you can technically start this business for around $240,000.
Right, on the low end.
But the franchisor will not even let you in the door unless you have a minimum net worth of $750,000. And crucially, $225,000 in liquid cash.
Yes.
That is essentially a 1-to-1 ratio of required liquid cash to the starting cost. Like, why does an investor need to hoard that much capital just sitting in a checking account instead of, deploying into the business?
It's a really good question. That requirement is actually a deliberate psychological and operational filter.
A filter for who?
Well, when evaluating franchise systems, you really have to look at what the franchisor is trying to prevent.
Okay.
Like in the quick service restaurant industry, if a franchise runs out of operating capital in month 3, what happens? They close the doors and people just buy a sandwich somewhere else.
Right. It's just a financial loss.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But in the senior care industry, if an operator runs out of capital, it is a life-threatening crisis for the resident.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, I didn't think about it like that.
Avendelle requires that high liquid capital because they are aggressively protecting the premium reputation of the brand and obviously the safety of the residents.
So they're actively filtering out the underfunded beginners who are hoping to just, bootstrap their way to success.
100%. They only want well-capitalized, sophisticated operators.
Operators who understand the reality of cash burn during a ramp-up phase.
Yes, because when you open a boutique care home, you have to secure the real estate and then make the necessary ADA modifications.
Like installing ramps or retrofitting bathrooms.
Exactly. And then you have to hire your highly trained medical staff.
Yeah.
You cannot just hire a caregiver after a resident moves in.
Right.
The house must be fully staffed, totally compliant, and operational on day 1, even if you only have one single resident living there.
So you are literally floating a full payroll for an empty, or, mostly empty house, while you wait for the state to finalize licenses and families to make their transition plans.
Exactly. That liquid cash ensures the franchisee can weather those first 6 to 12 months comfortably.
Without panicking.
Right, without ever facing the temptation to cut corners on care or staffing. It guarantees that the 3-to-1 ratio remains completely intact even when the cash flow is negative.
which guarantees the standard of care never dips.
Exactly.
And that protects the brand equity for every other franchisee in the system.
Bingo.
But let's look at this from the perspective of our core listener for a second. Because a lot of people analyzing this kind of opportunity are corporate professionals. Maybe a vice president of sales or a director of operations who is pulling in $250,000 a year.
Yeah.
They want to leave their W-2 job and build real equity in a business. But if the capacity of an Avendelle home is severely limited by the size of the house, like we're talking 4 to 6 beds, the margins on just a handful of residents cannot possibly replace a high-level executive salary.
Not with just one house, no.
So how does a boutique model like this scale to meet the financial goals of a serious investor?
You are hitting on the fundamental difference between an owner-operator and a multi-unit investor.
Okay, break that down.
If your goal is to buy one house and work inside it every single day as the administrator, you are essentially just buying yourself a job.
Right.
It will be a stable job, but it will not replace a massive corporate salary. The sophisticated investors, the ones leaving tech or finance, they do not buy one house. They view the model as a hub-and-spoke system.
Oh, so they are buying development rights for an entire territory.
Exactly. They look at a specific geographic zone and plan to open 3, 4, or maybe 5 homes within a really tight radius. The scalable mechanism here is centralized management. Once you have 3 houses operating in the same suburban zip code, you do not need 3 separate executive administrators.
You just need one.
Right. You, as the franchisee, sit above the operation. You hire one stellar clinical director or general manager who floats between the locations overseeing the caregivers.
And you centralize all the back office stuff.
Exactly. You centralize the marketing, the payroll, the human resources.
So the economies of scale don't actually happen inside the house.
Nope.
They happen at the back office level.
Exactly. The individual homes remain very intimate and boutique for the residents, preserving that premium pricing power and the high demand we talked about. But your back-end operations become highly leveraged.
That makes total sense.
That's exactly how a corporate escapee builds a multi-million-dollar portfolio. You stop managing the day-to-day care and start managing the managers.
But, okay, expanding a healthcare portfolio brings up an incredibly intimidating barrier to entry.
The compliance piece.
The compliance piece. Stepping into healthcare compliance without a background in it is like, I don't know, trying to build an airplane while in free fall.
It's daunting, absolutely.
Like one state zoning mistake on a residential property or one miscertification for a caregiver, and your business is shut down by the state health department before the paint even dries.
Yeah.
If I am that corporate professional and I don't know the first thing about medical licensing, how do I navigate that?
Well, you navigate it by leveraging the franchisor's operational support system. The data from the sources shows that Avendelle provides a really comprehensive framework for licensing, marketing, and compliance.
Okay.
They actually have a corporate headquarters team of 7 employees managing the network of 23 units.
Wait, hold on.
Yeah.
I have to stop you there because 7 corporate employees supporting 23 medical facilities sounds incredibly lean.
It does sound lean.
If each state and each county has completely different health regulations, how can a team of 7 adequately guide franchisees through that regulatory maze?
They can do it because the boutique residential model inherently bypasses the most complex commercial regulations.
Oh, because it's a house.
Think about what triggers massive regulatory oversight in traditional senior care. Commercial kitchens, industrial waste management, elevator safety protocols, high-density fire suppression systems.
Right. A standard 100-bed facility triggers all of those commercial codes.
Because it's legally and structurally a hospital.
Right.
But a 4 to 6 bedroom house in a residential neighborhood simply does not trigger commercial zoning laws in the same way. The modifications are largely residential things like ramps, widened doorways, specific bathroom fixtures.
Okay, that changes the game.
It really does. The corporate team isn't reinventing the wheel for every location because the physical footprint is standardized and relatively simple. They have a proven blueprint for converting a standard house into a compliant care home.
So the franchisor has already solved the hardest parts of the regulatory puzzle.
Exactly. And this leads to perhaps the most important strategic insight of the entire business model.
Which is
That intimidating regulatory environment you mentioned. It is not a deterrent. It is an economic moat.
it's a barrier that keeps the independent mom-and-pop operators completely out of the market.
Precisely. If opening an assisted living home were as easy as opening, say, a boutique fitness studio, every single neighborhood would be flooded with competitors.
That's so true.
The sheer volume of red tape absolutely terrifies the average entrepreneur. So when you pay that 6% royalty fee to Avendelle, you are not just paying to use their logo on a sign.
Right.
You are paying for them to hand you the exact map through that regulatory minefield. You are buying the operational blueprints and the compliance frameworks so that you don't have to figure it out through really costly trial and error.
Which fundamentally changes the job description of the franchisee. You don't have to sit in a back office deciphering state health codes because corporate has already distilled that into a checklist for you.
Which frees up the investor to apply the exact skills that made them successful in the corporate world to begin with.
Right.
You operate as the CEO of your local market. Your job is driving revenue. Your job is building relationships with discharge planners at local hospitals who desperately need a trusted place to send patients.
Oh, that's smart. Yeah.
Your job is networking with local community organizations, marketing to families, and ensuring your staff culture delivers top-tier care. You manage the P&L, you manage the growth strategy, and you just let the franchise system handle the industry-specific structural hurdles.
That reframes the entire transition from a W-2 employee to a business owner.
Totally.
It moves from feeling like this blind leap of faith into a highly calculated strategic deployment of capital. You are leveraging an established system to bypass the friction of a highly regulated industry, which allows you to ride this massive demographic tailwind of an aging population.
And from an investment standpoint, it offers a really rare blend of characteristics.
What do you mean?
Well, think about the landscape of franchise opportunities out there. Quick service restaurants, boutique fitness, home services, very few of them offer this level of resilience against economic downturns.
Because elder care is entirely decoupled from discretionary spending.
Exactly.
If a recession hits, families might, cancel their gym memberships, they might stop going out to eat, they might delay a kitchen remodel. But they do not compromise on the physical safety and daily care of their aging parents.
Never. The spending simply shifts, but it does not disappear.
It's an absolute necessity.
It is. And beyond the financial resilience, you really have to consider the emotional and community reward here.
Yeah.
When you operate an Avendelle home, you are providing a profoundly vital service. You are actively solving one of the most stressful problems a family will ever face.
Which brings this entire deep dive back to your journey of finding the right business vehicle. Choosing a franchise is not just about aligning the unit economics with your financial goals, right?
Yeah.
It is about deciding what kind of impact you want to have on your community every single day.
It dictates the legacy you're building.
It really does. And I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. Think back to that sterile, massive 100-bed facility we discussed at the very beginning of the deep dive.
The clinical one.
Yeah. Now, compare that to a quiet house on a cul-de-sac. Consider how integrating elder care directly into residential neighborhoods doesn't just change a business model. It actually shifts how society views aging itself.
That's a powerful way to look at it.
The elderly aren't just hidden away in some industrial complex on the edge of town anymore. They remain visible, integrated parts of the neighborhood. As a multi-unit owner in a system like this, you aren't just opening facilities. You are weaving a vital service right into the very fabric of the community. You are restoring dignity to a process that every single one of us will face one day.